Awesome to welcome Texas Legends Associate Head Coach Nelson Terroba to the Basketball Podcast. Nelson has filled many roles for the Texas Legends, an NBA G League affiliate of the Dallas Mavericks, including defensive coordinator, player development coach, and associate head coach. He has been with the Legends since 2019. Nelson has coached at the professional level for the Saskatchewan Rattlers, John Riptide, Erie Bayhawks, Bakersfield Jam. He has also been an assistant coach with the Congo National Team and a high school coach. Nelson started his coaching career at the University of Texas, where he first served as a student manager and later became the special assistant to the head coach under Rick Barnes. Nelson, welcome to the podcast.
Coach, thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here. Listen to a lot of these, so it's kind of interesting for me to be on here on the hot seat, but I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, there's no hot seat here. It's just fun. But I'm grateful for you. We've had a chance to get to know each other and learned a lot from you already. And I'm looking forward to learning more and, excited for the path you're on a little bit too. And for you to share it with our audience, particularly around this concept of modern functional coaching. Maybe first, let's start with what is modern functional coaching?
Well, I hate to kind of, trademark it or kind of create too much, buzz around the phrase, but what it is one of my former assistant coaches and a player who kind of played for one of my good friends and coach in Thomas Acker. His name is Terrell Murray. He's a PhD candidate at the University of Michigan now, and he was an assistant for me at St. John in NBL Canada. So we worked together, for a full season. And NBL Canada, for all that know, is the best training on earth for coaching and anything that comes up as part of coaching. So we got to kind of work together, and he's teaching and getting into the sports leadership side of things. So he asked me if I would come speak to their college course, their students who are aspiring coaches, about something regarding coaching. And this is something that kind of came up because after watching coach and being part of coaching, seeing so many coaches, we all get caught up in the details of the X's and O's, the strategy, the tactics, all those kind of things, which is natural. I'm one of them. But what I saw is there's a lot of, I guess there's kind of, sometimes I call it a copy and paste coach who copies and pastes, what they hear, what they see, but there's something missing from the delivery and from the interaction that I think makes it stick. So for me, that's kind of this model, and modern functional coaching is something I called it, but basically it starts with authenticity. I think that's the start of it all. Read a book, I'm sure many coaches have read it, Good to Great by Jim Collins. Great book, but the thing he talks about, he studies all these great companies and historically great companies, and he tried to figure out what made these companies that were consistently great performers in the stock market, I think 15 years or more consecutively. They outperformed the predictions and everything else. And try to see, is there a pattern of behavior between all these companies that brings it together? And one of the things he talked about was level 5 leadership. And level 5 leadership, when I read it, I was like, wow, that's fantastic. Like, it's not what everybody thinks leadership is. It's the kind of more humble leaders that kind of moved up through the ranks. These companies usually move people up from within the ranks that were more humble. But for me, authenticity is kind of that cornerstone of this model. And what I have listed is kind of level 5 humility. You have to be really good at what you do. You have to be a confident leader. You have to be a dynamic leader, dynamic communicator, all those things. But you also have to retain this kind of unique, and sometimes it doesn't make sense for people, this humility about you that is very much, I don't want the spotlight, I don't care for it. So I think for me, the modern functional coaching model starts with a leader who truly is okay with pushing all the credit out to everyone around him or her. So that's the first step, is kind of authenticity.
We know we're both on board with this. The basic premise being there's a better way, and mostly a focus on not what to coach, because again, we can share all that with coaches, but it's more about how to coach and how to approach it from there's a better way. And we know this in modern society. Coach everyone like pros. But if you think about it, you are not yelling at a pro. You're not ripping into a pro. You're not treating them any differently than you would treat yourself. And that's a
Correct.
big part of this, isn't it? In terms of how we communicate, and we move away from this old school model of transactional leadership.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, and I hadn't heard that from Joe Mazzulla, but that's exactly right. Treat them like pros, coach them like pros. We can't, and this model actually is probably born out of that experience too, because when you're young, or if you're coaching high schoolers, middle schoolers, college even, and you have this positional authority over your players, a lot of times you can get away with saying things in a certain way, or not even being on top of your game enough. And those players who are younger than you can't challenge you on it. They are not going to be in position to do. They may not even know enough to know that what they're experiencing is not sound. So having been, a high school coach for 10 years, coached at, a little bit at the University of Texas, was special assistant where I got started as a student manager there before then. So I've kind of been, I did the pro thing. I've been overseeing an AAU program in Austin, Syntax Attack, and kind of formed that from scratch. And so I've seen basketball from all levels and all angles. And I think that's what I've learned is even as a young coach, I would get more into this, I call it narrative-based coaching. Did you guys aren't trying, you guys didn't come ready to play. What's going on, outside the court? You guys look like you stayed up late last night. All these big narratives about this guy looks like he gets into the wrong things, away from the court. And I just learned over the years that that just doesn't matter. Like what matters is, I tell our players, if I have them as a head coach, do what you want away from the court. This is professional players. But when you step into the building, all I care is that you are ready to do your job when you're inside these four walls. Obviously represent our program well, don't do anything out of the ordinary. But beyond that, I don't care what you do beyond that. That's your personal choices. But that goes to, the second part of this model, if it is a model, is besides being authentic, the feedback has to be diagnostic, specific and measurable. When I go to the doctor, I don't want them to say, looks like you've been having a couple tough days. Doesn't matter if I've had a tough day or not. I just want to know, why does my stomach hurt? So just be diagnostic. Hey, you're not blocking out right now when the shot goes up. I'd like you to put a forearm in the chest. I'd like you to push out, 2 steps, find the ball, chin it, and then let's go the other way. Whenever the shot goes up, I need to have a forearm on a chest, and I need you to check and then, drive them and then find the ball. Something specific in terms of what's wrong. Like sometimes, coaches will say, this is unacceptable, or that's not us, or this can't happen. But just tell them what it is you're talking about, what specifically is going wrong, very specifically. And then the third part of it is, now you got to be prescriptive. I've told you what's wrong. Now you're doing this behavior. Now I need to tell you the substitute behavior that you need to fill into that space so that we can eliminate the bad behavior and replace it with a good one.
So we're going to dive deeper into all of these parts of the model, and especially around feedback, because I love that conversation. And let's go back first. Why do coaches have a hard time accepting this and changing and trying to adapt new ways? Because I'll tell you, I was not perfect, and I'm still not perfect, and I still struggle because I was brought up as a coach and a player in an era where everyone yelled at everyone to get something done, and it was very transactional. And we're always fighting that, in terms of that's what was modeled for us, and that's how it is. And even to this day, Nelson, we see this. If something's posted on Twitter, or you watch one of these documentaries and the way a coach is represented, and immediately if you argue against that type of hard coaching, someone will say, oh, you're soft. Kids are soft. And that's 100%. Like the default argument again. Oh, we're developing soft people if we're not coaching them hard. So talk to us a little bit, going back to all that, about why we have a hard time changing to this type of model, which is common sense and the way we would all want to be treated.
Well, it's easy for me because the reason I adopted this model is because I got fired when I was young. I was a high school varsity coach at the age of 26. My first head coaching job, 26, and at my own alma mater, my own high school in Texas. And one of the things that, within 2 years I had, I'd been fired. And what had happened is that we had some, talented players. And I got into, kind of behavioral battles with, these players, or, because of, what I thought was selfish behavior, what I thought was not good for the team. I don't think I was wrong, but what I didn't know then is I thought it was just enough to be right, in terms of like, it's enough to know that what I'm saying is right. Like, I'm calling out the behavior, right? I'm right. But what I learned is that, you know, basically, once I lost my job, it was really tough on me personally as far as a coach. I really had to reflect. But I guess I got to the point where I got over it and said, when you think about the really great teachers, the classroom teachers, you can't be a great teacher if all you can do is reach the loyal soldier, the student who sits at the front of the class, the great person who pays attention and picks up all the concepts the first time. That's not. And I've taught in the class. I've taught regular ed. I've taught AP, pre-AP. I've taught all levels. And to me, the best teachers obviously are the ones that can find that tricky student, that challenging student. They can reach those challenging students. They know a way to engage the students in all kinds of manners because they have such a command over the curriculum, and they know how to move between spaces quickly. And they also have a command over the people they're dealing with and the various personality types. And that's what I got to kind of have to accept is, if I'm going to try to sit here and act like I'm a great coach, or I want to, profess to be an effective coach, the effective coach isn't just the coach who can reach the players who are easily almost can coach themselves. I have to be a good enough. I have to have strategies. I have to have techniques that help me connect with players, across all spaces and time and ages and stages. And one of the big kind of an impetus for this was, as I was struggling through, how do I, should I do this? Can I do this coaching? I read a book on parenting. It was like, transformational parenting or something like that. And it just talked about really focusing on the specific behaviors, just the behaviors. This behavior is what's going on. This is the behavior I want you to do. Behavior substitution, right? Replacement behavior, that whole concept. Don't get emotional. Don't get up and down with it. Just simply identify the behavior and direct what you want the replacement behavior to be, and insist on it until the behavior changes. And then that's what you need to do. And once I started to figure out that it was less about big speeches and less about losing my wits and getting out of control, it was more about being better, about identifying what's going wrong and how we can fix it.
Well, thank you for sharing your vulnerabilities with this, because I have the same vulnerabilities. I had the same struggles, and it doesn't have to be something extreme like obviously getting fired. It's literally just, we know there's a better way, and we know people want to be treated that way. And it struck me as you saying that. I've shared this quote a few times on here, that it's like, okay, is the player uncoachable, or do they just need to be coached differently than the way you're coaching them? And that speaks to what you just said about these individual differences and accounting for them. And I like it even further that you got into this. It's about knowing your players in terms of these individual relationships. And it's not a big speech. It's all these mini conversations, isn't it?
It's many conversations, and it's, also being secure enough in your command over your craft that you don't have to lose your mind, and you don't have to put on a big show to prove that you know what you're talking about, right? You know it well enough that you could whisper it to them. You could tap them on the shoulder and bring them over for private conversation. You could joke about it in film if necessary and appropriate, but a different way to get to it. And I think, just being able to understand people. And you said at the beginning, I mean, like, this isn't rocket science. I'm an adult. I don't want my adult supervisors or peers to talk to me in a way where I'm like, why are you talking to me like that? And I guess I would say this too, which is the pain of learning this lesson, right, from losing, a job and kind of having to reflect. The truth of it is, I couldn't sit here with you today, being on this podcast as as kind of world famous as this podcast is, and the type of coaches you get on this podcast. And I wouldn't be in the G League. I wouldn't have coached professionals, and I never chose to want to do it. but I couldn't coach the players I coach today if I still embraced that old philosophy of, I'm right, you're wrong. The boss is always right. When I say it, you better listen, however which way I choose to say it. That stuff just doesn't work.
Well, and you paralleled it to parenting as well, which is a big part of this to me, for me, having now experienced parenting, is that so much of it is that we want to solve the problem for our child or for our player because we think we have an answer. But what we quickly realize is like, okay, that's our answer. Does that mean it's their answer or their best answer? And it's more about holding space for them to figure it out, to struggle, and then provide them guidance or opportunity to learn what we hope they learn. And that's a big part of this, isn't it? It's not just always giving them the answer and telling them to do this.
No, it isn't. But see, to be able to do that, Chris, you've got to have that kind of command again over the curriculum, command over the scope and sequence of whether it's life and you're the parent, or it's basketball and you're the coach, or it's chemistry and you're the teacher. Whatever it is, you have to have enough command over the curriculum so that you're not freaking out in that moment that like a kid, if I'm a 3-year-old, I fall off my bike, I scratch my knee, I start crying, I think the world is over, and my parents are like, just relax, it's fine, it's just a skinned knee, you'll be fine. I don't know that. That to me, that's the end of my world. And I know that's kind of an extreme example potentially, but for some coaches that don't have enough worldview or enough command over the scope and sequence of how I can make this behavior fit into a bigger timeline, they freak out about that moment in time, thinking that that's the skinned knee that's for sure the end of their world. But it's really just a small blip on the radar that if we just kind of work through it and know how to get to the other part of the timeline, we'd be fine.
So back to the model, being authentic. And I love that it starts really with this, which is humility, which is really essentially, it's not that we're saying don't have an ego as a coach, because I think egos are healthy for players and coaches. It's about humility. It's about understanding the greater purpose and subduing it and being able to operate in a plane where it's like, I just want everyone to be the best version of themselves. So can you share some other characteristics that you've found in this category that really coaches can kind of focus on to be able to help themselves improve?
In terms of the authenticity piece?
Authenticity, humility, yes.
Right. I think it's just, the old Coach Popovich, get over yourself line is basically it. I tell, young, I'm at this point in time, I'm an older coach in my circles, because there's a lot of young guys that are coming up in the G League and whatever. And, I just tell them, the question is, how do you develop this humility? And I don't know the quote exactly. I know there's an old quote that says there's two kinds of people, those who are humble and those that are about to be humbled. And I think that for me, it was that clear feedback of you're fired. What you're doing is not working. You are so sure that what you're doing was working. I think you have to either, sometimes I call it blind spot reduction. You've got to find a way to surround yourself with people who are going to give you feedback, real feedback that lets you know, hey, if you're the head coach, your assistant coaches, hey, I'm noticing this, watch out for this. This player's having this kind of reaction to some of the things we're doing. You need to constantly be asking people around you, what do you see? What are you noticing? And create an environment in your workplace or in your staff where everybody knows that you really want to hear what they're seeing and the truth. The best weapon against kind of arrogance and ignorance is actually lots of truth, constant, honest feedback coming your way. You have to build in kind of systems in a way where people around you are willing to share that with you. Doesn't mean you're going to do everything they tell you. Doesn't mean that you're going to, blindly follow what's being told to you, but you're creating an atmosphere where when something is going wrong and people see it, they can bring it to your attention, because as a leader, you've missed so much. There's no way you can keep track of everything.
I love this conversation. Thank you. And the feedback part, we're going to come to that and dive even deeper, because again, when I did this 30, 40 years ago in my master's, I can't even remember how old I am now, but a long time ago, just like you just referenced, right. There was positive feedback, there was negative feedback, and both of those types of feedback can have non-specific and specific. An example would be good job is just non-specific positive feedback. It doesn't give any information, right? And then I say good job on your layup. That's a little bit more specific in terms of that. But really what we're aiming for here is as you say, this prescriptive, this diagnostic, but also adding value to the player,
Mm-hmm.
which is,
Mm-hmm.
again, I'm telling them, hey, make your layup. That's not adding any value for the player. They know they
No.
missed the layup, and they know they're
Mm-hmm.
trying to make the layup, and I know they're trying to make the layup. So to get into this diagnostic, prescriptive type of feedback, give us some more, maybe give us another example, and then give us some ideas about how to really focus in on this as a coach.
Well, I think, the last, this will kind of round it all out. I guess there's two more pieces to it beyond diagnostic prescriptive. Then the next part would be EQ based. So emotional intelligence. So now I've got to kind of take note of who this player is. Maybe how do they receive information the best? You know what I mean? When's the best time to do it? What's the best manner? Maybe it is through video in a private conference. Maybe it's right there and then on the spot, and they are completely secure. They're completely, cool with anything you give them at any point in time. You have a relationship built up where you can give them that feedback without a problem. So that's the EQ part. And the last part if there was a model, it would say it's clear, meaning I want to make sure as I go through this cycle of diagnostic, I diagnosed the thing, I gave a solution, right? I thought about the person and how they would best receive it and how they are as a learner. But now, was it clear? Did they pick up on it? And so that's the check for understanding part as well. So that kind of fits into your question is, what are some examples? Let's say we go through the whole thing. We're talking about guarding a pick and pop big, let's say, in our world here. For us, pick and pop big, we call it a veer, right? So if it goes downhill, the big, sees his man's popping, he's yelling veer, 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 which tells the guard switch out or switch to my man and take the pop man. So it's just a late switch. Now everybody on this podcast, a lot of them know that terminology, but I don't want to assume it. So anyways, that's a veer. Well, I want to make sure that they understand it. For instance, I might say, hey, we're veering the pop on the big. So there's a lot of specificity that goes with that. In other words, how long does the guard escort the player into the three-point line before he veers off or she veers off to the shooter? Who's responsible for making that call? Is it the big? Is it the guard? When does a call happen? And so, like, for instance, and if the call doesn't happen for whatever reasons, let's say they both mess up and two people stay on the ball, in a weird way, what's our plan B? In other words, it would be full rotate. If you're the stunt man, you're going to have to emergency full rotate onto that popping big. So those are all things that might happen as part of it. But if they're not doing it right, it might start with, Bill, you need to call that coverage early. You didn't call ice. You didn't say it 3 times. You said it once. You whispered it. The person across the gym couldn't hear it. So specific and measurable as you didn't say it 3 times and you didn't say it loud enough, And so now at least I've got the call. I can direct the ball. Prescriptive is instead of saying it once, I need you to say it 3 times. And I needed you to say it louder. Now you yelled veer, but you yelled it before the big even popped and he actually rolled to the basket. So you got to wait till the big makes the choice. You got to let the guard escort that ball handler inside the 3-point line so he can also take away the 3-point shot. And then once he's inside the 3 and you see that guy popped, now you yell veer, and guard, it's up to you to honor that call. That all might happen, and then the guard veers, but then the guard veers and he doesn't get a stick hand up and he doesn't get to the body on the closeout. The big gets the ball and he shoots it. The guard veered, but he didn't close out properly. Now there's a 3-point shot that gets made. Well, that's the specific and measurable piece, is the actual closeout by the guard. Even though everything ahead of the time was done properly, that last piece of how the guard closed out to the body of the big might be wrong. So those are all examples of how you would, work through just a simple pick and pop veer, depending on where it went awry, is kind of an example. And at the end of the day, how do we make it clear? So then we teach that on Monday, but the next day, instead of saying, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, hey, run blank, blank, blank. And maybe you bring a group over and say, I want you to pop Billy today. And then you just test to see if the group executes the veer the next day without prompting them, without telling them what's coming. And then you say, hey, we did this yesterday. Why didn't you do it? And then at least gets them like thinking like, oh man, I guess we are supposed to just, start from where we left off and actually pick up what's been being taught here on a daily basis.
Well, I like that example for a number of reasons. That last part is about connecting. You're connecting something from the day before, from within the practice, to something that actually helps them be better and helps your team succeed. So I love that part of it. And then the other part of that example, which I want to highlight, because here's a common problem. Again, consulting with different coaches at different levels, a common problem is too much feedback, which is
Mhm.
equally as destructive, isn't it? And you're saying
Yes.
to focus on prescriptive and diagnostic, but that doesn't mean give them all the information does it?
No, no. And that's what I'm saying. Like you have to parse it out and you have to know how to. I mean, that's what I say when I keep coming back to this phrase, command over your curriculum.
Mm-hmm.
The copy paste coach can probably just recite that we're supposed to veer pops, but they may not be able to say that we have to direct the ball, we have to put it inside the three, we have to make the read on the pop, we have to do all these things in sequence. Maybe they don't see those pieces, but they know what you're supposed to do against a pick and pop big. So yes, some of the layers there of instruction, that's I guess part of the art is being able to know that what specifically is the thing that's getting wrong here, and then sometimes as a coach, you're gonna know your guys enough to know, or girls, to say, you know what, I know we're talking about veering, but this team does some things where they pop and then they roll for a second and they pop and then there's some confusion. I also have to build in a plan that says in case both people go with the ball because this guy's really good, emergency situation is this, and now I've got to switch everybody else on the court to, even though they're supposed to do this, there's another part of this that you need to be responsible for in case there's a mistake here, and that also can be part of our plan.
Yeah, part of your plan is to figure it out because there's not always a perfect answer. And then the other part that struck me, and I know you've seen this too, it's like I've been in practices where it's the greatest coaching clinic, but it's not so
Mm-hmm.
good for the players. And that's what you're
Mm-hmm.
talking about layering information in. And I know, like Nelson, you could give me a 1 hour clinic easily on veering, but the players
Mm-hmm.
don't need to know it, and they don't need to know it all at once, which is another big part of that, isn't it?
That's right. I mean, I was listening to your pod with your wife. You guys were talking about dripping, kind of instruction in, kind of layering it and dripping it in slowly. And that's really just what this is. It's just being able to understand. And sometimes it's, like when I was a young coach, starting out, let's do all this. Let's build a defense from scratch. Let's do every drill. We'll do a one-on-one drill, then we'll do a closeout drill. We'll do and then all of a sudden, let's do the shell drill. Then all of a sudden, like they already knew all that stuff. So now sometimes I just get them playing in a cutthroat fashion early in a training camp. I say, we're doing this, we're doing that, show them the basics. I let them play and then I watch them play. Their play shows me where the gaps are. Our talk isn't good. Our talk's pretty good. That big knows how to talk. He must have played for 5 years. He looks really good with that. So instead of assuming that everybody has no knowledge when they run into the building, as far as especially as a pro, even with young kids, get them playing and let their play tell you what needs to be worked on, as opposed to you administering instruction over something that may already be known.
Yeah, dripping. I love that. Thank you for connecting that for people because that's exactly what it is. It's dripping it in, but also the main part is exactly what we share all the time in the basketball immersion community is start with the game and figure out what you actually need to teach because then that skips all those useless progressions that take time away from actually what they need. So that's a super example in terms of that. I want to come back to the check for understanding, the clear part of this because that's an important part too. And I've shared it with coaches as saying that, like, whenever you ask a player, do you understand? You're probably not getting anything back. So take it deeper with us and help us
Mm-hmm.
understand how to actually check for understanding.
Well, yes, it starts with your questions, and it might be shot went up, hey, reset it, and I think you have a term for this, and I was listening the other day, but where you replay it or whatever,
Yeah,
so
recreate.
recreate, yeah. So I've always liked that one, doing that for a while. But basically, hey, get back to where you were, shoot that ball, and what I might say instead of telling them what to do, I'll be like, Chris, show me what you're supposed to do on the weak side when the shot goes up right here. Show me. And then all of a sudden, they'll either spur right into action, they'll do what they're supposed to do. And then I said, did you just do that when the shot went up last time? No. Okay. Why not? I forgot. Can we clean that up? Can you do that from here on out? Absolutely. You know what I mean? Instead of going to a long soliloquy about, hey, when the shot goes up, you got to do this, you got to do that, you got to do all these things. Just say, hey, show me what's supposed to happen when this happens. Or again, the next day, checking for understanding. Like if we did, a certain shell drill or we did a little drill, I'll just be like, show me, and I'll just walk through. Show me what happens. Pass the ball. Show me what happens. What are we supposed to talk about? We did Van Gundy the other day in practice, which is our transition defense drill. 5-on-4 plus 1. I taught it the day before. So this time when I said, just start pass it, pass the ball. Show me what's supposed to happen. They pass it. No one says anything. Nope. We're supposed to say something on every catch. What are we supposed to say? Oh, yeah. Ball, gap, white. I got 2. Okay, keep moving it, keep moving it, keep moving it. Everyone gets it. Okay, got it, coach. Now, show me what the closeouts are supposed to look like. Show me. They get the hand up. I say, no, that's not it. Do it again. No. Close out to the body. It's transition. You got to get chest to chest, no airspace, no chopping of the feet. Get there. And then all of a sudden they're doing it right. They're doing it right. They're doing it right. Now, when we take 4 minutes of instruction after that or 4 minutes of competition, they're actually really keyed into the talk, the closeout, the talk, the closeout, because we did it the day before. We covered that, but today I consolidated that, and now they're really starting to get it. So that's kind of an example of checking for understanding in a different way than just saying, just necessarily questions. I like saying, show me what it looks like.
I love that example on another level too, which is like, how do you get players to communicate? You shut up. like coaches, it's pretty simple. Like to get players to talk more, we have to be quiet to give them the space to do it. So that's such a great example for that too. The other part of check for understanding, Dan Abrams, who was on the basketball podcast too a while ago, talked about this concept of memory consolidation, which I just want to reconnect for people, because it's also what you're talking about there is by asking them a question, you're getting them to reflect, to think deeper. And essentially the question can be something as simple as, before we move on, tell me something you understood. And just getting them to reflect, whether you actually let them answer, you pause for 10, 15 seconds and you let them think. And then maybe I just ask one person, I ask Nelson, and then we move on. Or maybe I get them to share it with someone on the team and say, okay, 10 seconds, reflect on something you just learned that can help you, and share it with a teammate. That memory consolidation is part of this clear check for understanding.
Big time. And, that you mentioned that, like, this is something I learned from Coach Bullwinkle, Dave Bullwinkle, who used to work Snow Valley for years. Great mentor of mine. But when I was 21, 22 years ago, I started working Snow Valley basketball camp in California. And Coach Bullwinkle was working the point guards. Well, one thing I always noticed when he did at the end of his segments, and he was great, he's a great coach, great teacher. He would say, he would look at the group and he'd say, tell me one thing you learned today. Tell me one thing you learned today. And he'd wait. And then I read the Teach Like a Champion book, and they talked about this type of thing. And so that's another thing I'll do early in training camp. At the end of a full practice, say, tell me one thing you learned today. And it is amazing. And I'll say, I'm going to wait, raise your hand when you're ready. And we'll teach like a champion strategy. Raise your hand when you're ready, but then you wait till everybody raises their hand before you call on somebody, right? So now, instead of just letting that star student always intercept the question, always make the answer, you wait, make sure everybody participates. Then you say, I'm going to wait till everybody has their hand raised. All of a sudden, last person, maybe who's a student who doesn't, has to process a little bit longer, they raise their hand to the last one. Boom, I start with you. What's one thing you learned? Now that person takes part in it. They got to get the first chance at that, that answer, so that they don't have to end up being the last in line and says, well, he took mine. But now they're being part of like the learning. They feel safe about sharing what they learned. They feel effective as a learner because they got called on and they got an answer right. Like I know how to kind of be part of what's going on here. That's another thing that I'll use as well is tell me one thing you learned today, and make sure everybody raises their hands before I call on somebody.
Brilliant. Great example. And that pause, which is what you said there, that pause is so important, because I mean, we're obsessed as coaches to the detriment of learning with intensity. And it's like, as soon as a player doesn't answer a question right away, we often, in the past would lose our mind. Like, why don't you know the answer? But it's like, we didn't give them space to think. We didn't give them that time to think. And I love that idea of letting everyone get to the point where they can raise their hand. And it doesn't mean you're asking everyone. That's Just great stuff. Thank you for that example. Going back to this then, if I don't have prescriptive or narrative type of information to be able to give to, or sorry, diagnostic information to give to a player, is there a value to me saying nothing? I know. I know it seems obvious, but I think a lot of coaches feel, and I shouldn't even say coaches, I think coaches know. Mm-hmm. I think it's like this narrative that exists from other people's perception of what coaching is, that we have to be constantly talking and communicating and doing this.
Yeah. I mean, I know I worked PGC years ago, point guard college, and I think they call it, the sage on the stage, the person who needs to just feel like they know all the answers to everything. And yeah, you're right. Giving space to things. It's just a bandwidth thing. There's an old statement, I know you've heard this one. If everything's important, nothing's important. And so if everything's important, every coach, everything, you stop all the time, everything's important. Like no one knows what's really important, So another one, kind of going with this clear, kind of piece of the modern functional coaching we're talking about. There's an old general, that says, I may have been MacArthur or whatever, but I remember reading it once. And he said that my job is not to give orders that can be understood. My job is to give orders that cannot be misunderstood. That is like the critical piece. Like when I heard that, as reading it, I was like, that's exactly right. And you need to know how to say things in a way that's so clear that nobody can mistake it. And also they got to know at times, like, that's why, like, for instance, cutthroat, we call it cutthroat, but it's 4-on-4 live play with rules. And I know you guys, you have your loads and you add the loads and everything. That's cutthroat back from Snow Valley days. But that is the best teacher, because like the rules do the teaching. And the fact that, that's a turnover, no points for that. It just does the teaching. And that's another lesson I learned, is I need to create structure within my practice so that the accountability of the drill, the way I structure the drill, creates the accountability, not the volume in my voice, not the intensity of my tirade. That does nothing to create the desired outcome, right? Or it might create the desired outcome, but there's some kind of byproducts of that approach that create, lasting things that aren't as good. All I care about is that they know how to do what I want. So really, when I was, coaching at Syntax Attack as an AAU program in Austin, building, that facility out at the PAC, I was trying to think about and I was teaching coaches, I was teaching these kind of volunteer coaches who were helping with our teams. And instead of calling it practice planning, I call it practice engineering, because you're really an engineer's trying to get a certain thing, a certain set of objects to work in a design fashion to create a certain outcome. And like practice is not about just planning it. You need to engineer each piece of that so that cutthroat for defense creates closeouts, creates blockouts, creates jump to the ball. Whatever it is you want, you create those rules, and that creates the outcomes.
So what I feel that we've done and what we're doing here is we're adding a language and a cohesive, understandable language to things that I think a lot of coaches have been doing for the last 30, 40 years that are very good coaches, right? Like using the point system, something like that. That's a constraint-led approach to coaching. Coaches have always used that. But to now connect it the way you connected it there is what we share all the time. Connecting it to that's the consequence. We don't need to run them. We don't need to yell at them. We need to create a consequence. And as you said, one of the worst consequences is obviously losing in a drill or losing in general. And another one is losing possession of the ball and not getting to play offense. So I always say one of the most powerful consequences is, oh, you lost your chance to play offense. And that's really what these things help shape for us, because we shouldn't be spending our time coaching effort, right? And generally, we don't have to coach effort as much as people think, do we?
You don't, as long as you design the practice in a way that it takes care of itself. I mean, this is the lesson of it all. Like, I don't need to lose my cool to get you to play at a high level. I told one of my friends once, the best compliment I ever received, probably in coaching, I was coaching freshman basketball at Austin High School. And it was pregame, our team was out there. They were, they were real sharp. They're doing everything right. The talk was, good and everything. And I'm over there, on the bench before the game, and I'm just sitting there very calmly with my legs crossed, just watching, just relaxing. Right before the game, it's just, only peaceful time as a coach sometimes. so I'm doing that. And, even I the precursor to this is, a week before, it's one of our first games. And I tell the players in practice, I said, this is what I'm going to be doing in 2 weeks. I'm going to be sitting right here. And I put a chair. I'm going to sit right here. And I want all this to look completely like I've lost my mind. But I'm going to be sitting here, right here, calm as anything, right? And so a parent after the game from the opposing team came up to me. She's like, I don't know how you do it, but I watched your kids in the pre-practice, in the warm-up drills, in the game. They're so intense. They're so, so connected or whatever. And you're just so calm on the sidelines, and I don't know how you do it. And that was like the best compliment I could ever receive as a coach.
I love that. That's I'm glad you connected that, because I say it all the time. My job as a coach is not as a motivator. I am not a motivator. I am the creator of the environment for you to be motivated. So if you're not motivated, I didn't create the environment. And you know what I constantly come back to, obviously, which supports what we share, is we always play basketball in practice. So generally, they're always motivated, right? Because there's offense versus defense with the goal of scoring. And as soon as we remove the goal of scoring, or we remove the defense, or remove the offense, motivation is going to drop. That's just natural. No matter how much we get on them about it, a 3-on-0 drill is not going to be as intense as a 3-on-3 drill with the goal of scoring.
Yeah. And I mean, it's not, I mean, we're talking about it and we are making it sound very, sort of scientific and everything. And it is, right? But
there is science to it. There is science to it if people want it, but mostly it's just common sense.
Right. It is common sense. It's like, I don't like to be bored.
Yes.
I like to
they're bored. It's our responsibility, right? Because we didn't create an effective practice.
It's 100% our responsibility. And and if they're not engaged, but it goes back to, again, it's the teaching model, also to the coaching model. They're both, they should be the same. But sometimes people, they separate them. But, again, you go watch a great team. I mean, I've been really engaged in history classes and I've been bored to death in history class. I've been really engaged in math classes, bored to death in math classes. It's not necessarily the subject. It's the manner in which the instruction is delivered. Obviously, it's created by the instructor, but like everybody here who listens to the podcast has taken a course that they didn't think they would like the subject, and the teacher's just out of bounds good, and they're like, man, that is a great teacher. But they know how to deliver information and connect things in a way so that you can receive it on your terms, and so that you can engage with it in a way that, like, I read books in high school. I just didn't ever really like, when growing up in high school, and I had great English teachers, but I just, I didn't really read the books for personal enjoyment. I read the books because it was the assignment, and it wasn't until like college where I actually learned that there's actually like coaching books and leadership books that I chose to start reading, that I was like, man, I love reading, but I never loved reading like this when I was in high school. This is not, no insult to my English teachers, which were very good, but that's just, I just didn't like connect the reading. Like, that's just the thing I'm choosing to do. It was like a part of a class that I needed to do.
So dive deeper for us just a little bit on this emotional intelligence.
Yeah, I think EQ based, I think one of the things that comes to mind. So, okay, this is all born out of, so when I was at in Austin running this facility, the PAC, Centex Attack, first year we had 13 coaches, had to hire them, volunteer coaches for this, they got paid, but it wasn't a lot, and I started to like, I hired them based on their experience. Like, oh yeah, you played, and then, okay, yeah, you played in college. All right. Great. Former player. Great. I started to realize like we didn't share the same language of what is coaching? Like, what is coaching? Like, it's not, again, this delivery of information or screaming and yelling at players. It's all this stuff. So for me, when we literally defined it into 3 domains for the coaches, this was the quote, the portrait of a master coach for our program. The first layer was EQ, emotional intelligence. And we defined it as the ability to perceive, control, and evaluate your players' emotions and needs. Okay. So what that meant, and we broke it down into three things. One was relational rapport. You know, how do you connect with a player, on their level on something, you just kind of connect with them. Can you develop a rapport with them? The next thing is, do you have like a growth mindset mastery? Do you know that how to, not to create like these outcomes based on it, how to create an environment where mistakes are okay, but that you learn from them, and that's how we grow. And then the last part of what we call them EQ, emotional intelligence, is you have to be really good at what we call world-class feedback. And world-class feedback is what we're talking about here: specific, diagnostic, specific and measurable. Don't do this, do this. And so that was an area, and we would have, instead of just, we'd have this model for them, and then we'd say, you're gonna be evaluated on this by the players, by the parents, and by me as the director. And we shared the model, and then we'd have a little mid-season thing. We'd send out an online survey, and then we would say, hey, how does your play? And we define all these terms. And then we'd give the coaches feedback on, here's what they're saying about you in terms of this domain of emotional intelligence.
It also speaks to that parents, players, they do want a framework of understanding. And I love that part about coaching nowadays is I find, again, players don't want to just do what we tell them. They want to understand it. They truly do. And that's a big part of it. So I love that example that you just shared, right? Do you feel that way as well, that players want to truly understand it a little bit deeper?
They do. And what a lot of folks don't understand is that just the humans are advancing so quickly right now, that the players that we coach that are 12, 13, they are exposed to so much. I mean, they can get on YouTube. They can find out how to, set up a pick and roll, the reads, all this. What does John Morant do on the pick and roll? What does Trae Young do? Like, they come to our gym, they already like practice the things that they just saw on YouTube, and they know the progression.
They know what a snake dribble is already. Isn't that amazing?
They know a snake dribble. They know the different finishes, the same finish, the this and that. They know all of the veer step. They know all these things that they can see, because if I was a young kid in this era, I'd be the same way. We didn't have access to that type of stuff. So this is what it goes back to, today's coach needs to be obviously in command of all that knowledge, right? But now in command of knowing how to, again, emotional intelligence. This guy knows this girl knows this already. I don't need to worry about tactics and strategies with this person. I need to kind of bolster up, the way they communicate with their teammates. That's their sweet spot. That's what's important to them in terms of their development. They got all this stuff. Like, I work with players like just run circles around me. That they're fantastic players that I could never do the things they do, but there are things that I can help them with in terms of situational awareness, how they speak to teammates, how they recognize certain situations on the court, how they compose themselves when they have challenges. That's the coaching that happens a lot at this level, which because they already have worked so hard at the skills, and we just have to tighten up the reads here and there. But that's the part of it that I think people need to know is that you just need to be able to connect the stuff to the players wherever they're at. This concept of the sweet spot that I know was in, I think it was in the Talent Code, right? The Talent Code was that book, talked about the sweet spot, like the world-class instructors, the master instructor, I think they called it, has that ability to know that, and that sweet spot changes every day. I'm going to add, like you say, drip in a piece of constraint or a new challenge every day. And, like you say, I think I listened to you, but like same thing, we have a certain shell drill, a certain sequence that's the same every day. It might be Van Gundy, but every day we're adding a new challenge to that thing, a new way to make it better so that they're getting better and not having to learn a new drill every day.
Well, and it speaks to the expertise part of it, which is the talent code, the sweet spot part, which is that experts, actually, it's not about more. It's about distinguishing the important from the unimportant. And I think that's the example of a teacher who's progressing in their learning, is they're starting to really understand, okay, I don't need to worry about this, but this is important, right? And spending time and really dialing in on the things that really matter the most. And I think that's such an important path in learning. This has been so valuable. I know it's not the normal technical, tactical that you and I could geek out on for hours together, but help us connect this back to, how does this help with player development? How does this help with running an NBA or G League defense, for example?
Yeah, I think, that's kind of, this has kind of almost been reverse engineered. I'd had to work over the years to try to find these ways to create the language in a way, in the structure of the practice, so that the players were held accountable. Again, because I can't scream and yell at the professional players. They just have to be held to account by the structure of the practice. So, like for instance, with defense, everyone talks about being tough and smart, and playing together. So we did, I did have to, present our defense to our team and talk about our big ideas. But when I said tough, I wanted to be specific and measurable with what do I mean by tough? And I define tough as all five players on the court sprinting back on defense. All five players are able to play physical without fouling. All five players on the court are gang rebounds. Everybody's a rebounder. So I wanted them to know, when I say tough, it can't be 4 out of 5, and it can't be 3 out of 5. If our team was going to be tough, all 5 of you on that court need to be able to do these things. And these are all within your control. And we're going to teach you how to do physical, that we're going to teach you the techniques. But at the end of the day, we're only going to be considered tough if everyone on the court is doing these things when every shot goes up. So that would be an example of tough. For smart, the 3 tenets were tough, smart, and connected. So for us, smart, the first element of smart is knowing your personnel. Everyone talks about KYP, know your personnel. So if you want to be a smart defender, you need to know, are you guarding a shooter, a driver, right, left, all those things. What coverages are we executing? The second part of smart is appropriate help. So when I'm off the ball, how much do I help? I'm guarding a non-shooter, I can shrink the floor more. I'm guarding a very good shooter, I can shrink, but then I got to inch back out to my check whenever the ball's coming my way. So this is appropriate help, knowing that when the ball gets picked up off the dribble, we can fan back out to our players instead of staying in that help. So this is another example. Being smart is, I wanted to know that we're not always just helping willy-nilly. You need to know how to help appropriately based on the threat level of what's taking place. And lastly, as far as being smart, we call it assignment excellence, which is basically, I would end up, again, this is born out of coaching in the pros. I wanted to be able to grade players in a way and hold them accountable. So after every game, I would do a defensive missed assignments, report. I call it MIA, missed or incomplete assignments. And I would literally catalog every mistake, player, the amount of points it cost. So then I would be able to tell a player, Chris, you gave up 7 mistakes, and I'd have them listed. I'd have the video so they could see them. 7 mistakes for 15 points. You gave up 15 points on these controllable errors that we've worked on in practice. So I know you're getting that box score that tells you scored 15. I'm giving you a box score that never gets produced anywhere else, that says that you gave up 15 that were within your control. So that's an example of a specific diagnostic, prescriptive, emotionless, this is the facts type presentation of the information.
That's just great stuff. Thank you for sharing that. And you know what, Nelson, will also challenge everyone to see who listened to the end of the podcast for that gold, that MIA gold. So that is just wonderful. I cannot thank you enough for sharing the game with us. Just tremendous stuff throughout.
Yes, sir. And, I appreciate the time here. It'll be a challenge for my guy, Josh Welch, who's a huge fan of yours. He's a coach here in Texas. He was thrilled that I'd be on here. So I'm giving him a shout out, but, just again, an honor to be here. The ability to kind of, we talked about it ahead of time, sharpen the saw. Obviously none of this stuff was, I didn't know the sequence of these questions, which has been good for me. And like, it's just been a very, very easy conversation, because I guess it's something you're probably passionate about. I know you are, I know I am. How to teach is, on the hierarchy of needs, how to teach has to be above what to teach, as you said before. And maybe we do another one another day about some of the specifics of defense and player development and all this stuff. But all I'll say is that even with our player development, we do the same things. It's that's something that this year I got. I'm not in charge of our defense this year. I'm in charge of player development, and taking some of this approach to that. And one last thing I'll say, as far as the strategy for coaches, because I know it applies with player development. The start, stop, continue kind of model. So like, we have this thing, we show them data about the shot charts and where the shots are coming from and all these kind of things, numbers and points per possession on different things. We give them a little data so that it's not, so there's data there. We show them video so they know those concepts, and we marry those concepts to what we're training on the court. We use similar terminology about what we're doing, like you said, snake dribbles or whatever. We use that terminology on the court, in the video. But then the one piece that I think has been really good that we put into that is what we call the start, stop, continue. So now when I show them, and we check in every 12 to 15 games, show them the data, show them the video, but then at the end we go to start, stop, continue. Okay, so based on what we talked about, what do you want to start doing as a player? And it's their choice. You start to do this. And then I might have one free pick as a coach that on each one of these things. So if they miss something, I say, well, I think this one too. What do you think? Like, yeah, let's do that one. Then we say stop. Yeah, I need to stop, jogging back on defense. I need to stop being quiet, as a point guard or whatever. And I'll say, okay, you got them all. I don't need to add anything. Continue showing up on time, getting your shots before practice. Continue watching, whatever that they're doing well, making them do like a needs assessment that makes them self-reflect on what am I doing that's working? What am I doing that needs to stop? That's been something that we implemented this year that I've seen good progress from our players when they have to think about and make the choices about what they're wanting to do and take ownership over.
I love it. I love it. Those two last things definitely connect with me. The MIA and the start, stop, continue. Just great stuff. Thank you, Nelson.
Yes, sir.